Okay, here we go. It is time for stud stories. We've got the stud. All we need is the story. And now the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, Ron, what's going on, man?
Hey man, just glad to be here. Another beautiful day in paradise, man.
Hey, I
Uh,
love the stud stories. And here's one of the reasons. You're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorites, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
yeah, yeah, man, and one of my all-time favorites too, as a matter of fact. Cool dude, and I'm ready to roll on it, my man. I'm just about to jump into it. Okay.
Let's go, stud. Yeah.
All right, so I want to talk. This all begins basically for me, and I kind of want to do this. More personally because I spent a lot of time with Dusty, uh, and it actually all started. Let's start today with in the fall of 1970. I was wrestling in Georgia the summer of 1970. It was my first 6 months ever in wrestling. Started about May, and in the fall of the year, I needed to make a move to another territory. I got what was called notice, in territories when you work there that you had a run here, and we need to let you. You need to find a place to go.
Hmm.
So, and I had played ball down there in Florida at the University of Miami, and so and I was very familiar with Eddie Graham, a great friend of my dad, and so I made arrangements to get into the Florida territory. Which, wow, I was really lucky to do, and luckily they put me in there and gave me a spot.
Hmm.
So I moved down to the Florida Territory in the fall of 1970 from Georgia. And on my first day there, I went to the wrestling office, which his address was, I'll never forget it, 104 North Albany. It's the old snake pit, man. And then it wasn't a snake pit at that time to me, but it's going to become the snake pit. So one of the first wrestlers I encountered there was someone I had never heard of.
Huh.
I had never even heard the name before, and I met Virgil Riley Runnels Jr., alias Dusty Rhodes, who's years later going to be called the American Dream, and I think he's one of the greatest stories in the history of professional wrestling. Probably Dusty is just he's a figure of his own, and wow, he deserves a special place in wrestling.
No doubt.
And he was extremely nice to me the day I met him, and he was nice to me every day I ever knew him. I mean, Dusty was a great guy. He had a great personality, and he was so upbeat, and he enjoyed life. I guess that's a great way of putting it. So I'm going to give a little history. Let's start with a little bit of history about Dusty. Dusty was born in Austin, Texas on October 12th, 1945. And he grew up to be a big man, obviously, and in more ways than one, I got to say. And unlike most wrestlers that had that bodybuilder anatomy, Dusty was maybe a little big in the belly, in the front side of the body, and a little big in the butt on the back side.
Yeah.
But what he lacked in physique, Dave, he made up for and on the microphone.
Oh,
Big time.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And he may have been the best interviewer in the history of the sport. And I don't think he really has anybody that really can compete with him.
I liked
He
his
would.
interviews as much as I like seeing him wrestle.
Oh yeah, I mean, and so did the wrestlers.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
liked Dusty's interviews,
Yeah.
and we used to do these television tapings on Wednesday in that building in Tampa, in the old sportatorium there, and we would cut interviews for every market in Florida. And gosh, that was like a 3 hour procedure. And every time Dusty came up, everybody got quiet. It was really odd. Everybody'd sit over and keep talking when most guys were cutting their interviews. But when Dust got up, everybody shut up. It's like, wow, they wanted to hear it. And I, being a young guy at this time, I was paying particular attention, along with the Dick Slaters and the Mike Grahams and the Bob Orton Juniors and the Bob Roops and all the young wrestlers that were there and had an opportunity to hear him do his thing. So this stud story is about obviously another one of those NWA World Champions that I was honored to be in the ring with. But like some of them that I have done previously, they weren't champions when I wrestled him.
Hmm.
But during my 18-year career, I did have opportunity to wrestle Dusty. And well, I'm going to give fans just a little idea of some of those matches, and I could spend a whole lot of time here describing Dusty's accomplishments in the sports because he had a lot of them.
Yeah.
Wow, he went on to do some huge things, man. But I want to kind of focus here on the personal memories I have of him during the time I knew him well, which was basically from 1970 until 1974. So in the fall of 1970, Dusty, when I went there, was partners with another Texan, Dick Murdoch. And they were the Florida Tag Team Champions. Boy, they were quite a team. Wow, man. They not only could talk, but they could walk, man. They could do it all. And we're a great, great team. So during my early years in Florida, I seldom got an opportunity to wrestle against that team. I was green. I was only 6 months in when I went there, and they were champions. So, at 6 months in the business, you didn't get to go in the ring with the champs. So my brother and I did wrestle them, though, one time in Tallahassee in 1971, which was about a year after I'd gotten there. And later on that year, on the last Caribbean trip of the Florida office ever made, down to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then back up the next day to Nassau in the Bahamas, I got to wrestle them in Bahamas. So I have a couple of stories on that trip. That particular trip, I have some pretty good memories of. And I'd like to just talk to the fans about this particular trip. And the flight going in, we had been flying down there for a year, more than a year at this point. And I was having to go with my Uncle Lester, my dad's uncle, actually. So my great uncle, I guess, was what you would call him. And my great uncle Lester had his own private plane. And I've told a lot of plane stories about Lester's plane. And it got to be a real hassle, and we had a lot of problems. And he finally started having problems with his plane itself. And they finally started allowing us, some of the younger guys that were having to ride down with Lester, 7-hour flight from Fort Lauderdale to San Juan, Puerto Rico, on a 2-engine plane with no bathroom.
Wow. Yeah.
And loaded down with every seat filled and bags. And some bags probably weighing 50 pounds each. Overloaded big time. So when they flew us on this last trip, I got to fly a commercial. Now, Dusty and Dick and those guys, Briscoes and all the big names, they flew commercial all the time. 1.5-hour flight from Miami rather than 7 hours.
Yeah.
Bang, bang, you're there, So on this particular flight, they're on the plane and they're in the back. I think they're in the back row of the plane. And none of us got to sit in first class. They didn't buy us a first class ticket. But, I was up, about the middle, I guess, of the second cabin where everybody in the cheap seats sat. And you could hear Dusty and Dick back there because they make a lot of noise anyway, and they're having a good time. And I'm sure they're having a few drinks going down, too, at the same time. And about halfway through the flight, we have a problem. And the pilot comes on and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a little hydraulics problem here, and it appears that, we're going to have to circle here for a bit and see if we can figure this out." And, it kind of alerted everybody. It took the edge, it put the edge, I should say, on that flight instantly. When you get one of those announcements, you're always a little concerned. And then it got a little worse, and they had to come down. They tore up some of the carpet in the between the floor so they could get down into the compartments where the wheels and the hydraulics turned to put the wheels down on the plane.
Wow.
Wow. That's not a good thing either.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's
now,
work.
Now everybody's
we
really
want
different.
to. We want to work on it while we're flying it.
Yeah, well, because what they were down there for, and I'd been on another flight like this with my dad going into Atlanta when I was in college, and they wanted to crank the wheels down. There's a way they can crank the wheels down if the hydraulics don't work.
Okay. Manual. Yeah.
manually crank the wheels down.
Yeah.
So they went down and they started into that process, and then something happened. They thought they had it fixed. So
Hmm.
the pilot came back on. They got out of that compartment down there. They put the carpet back as best they could, and then he makes the announcement that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be fine. But preceding all of that, when they started going down and looking at the wheels about cranking them down, then they had the stewardesses go through the basics of a potential crash.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they taught you how to brace, and you bend forward, and, you put the cushion, if you had a pillow or whatever it was, you put it in your lap.
Hmm.
They come by and they take the pens and the pencils away from you in case they're going to be flying around in case you do wreck. And so, everybody's thinking that, this is a bad deal,
Uh-huh.
and, when they teach you the brace position and the whole deal, and then the stewardess say, you're not going to hear that brace unless there's a problem,
Hmm.
when we do land.
Yeah.
So anyway, the two of them are in the back, and they're still pretty rowdy, man. You can hear them. They're in their own little world back there.
Yeah.
And so we start to land, and once we start to land, and we are going down, um, we get to the runway, and when you get that first little touch of the wheels, and you get that little eat squeak,
Yeah.
because the rubber meets that road down
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
at 180 or whatever, 200 miles an hour, or whatever
Hmm.
the landing speed is. And nothing went wrong except for the fact that those two guys in the back, they screamed, brace.
Oh my God.
and, and I went over too, but then I realized on the way down that that's Murdoch and Rhodes back there. So I stuck my head up. There wasn't a single head on the aircraft. Everybody had brains.
Oh
It
my
all
God.
gone down, right?
Oh my
And,
God.
now we're still rolling down the runway. We're still rolling down the runway 100 miles an hour.
Uh-huh.
And the stewardesses are up and in their faces. They're, you idiots, what is wrong with you guys?
Oh my God.
And they're back there laughing like crazy. So, that was kind of a little idea of what they were all about.
Mhm.
So we fly the next day from San Juan into the Bahamas, and we're working in Bahamas.
Mhm.
And we've been going there for a long time, and that's crazy wrestling there. I mean, you could get killed in several different ways, many different ways. And
Yeah.
they throw people over the walls, and then they throw rocks from the outside of the stadium. And wow, that's where they cut the tree down, and they did all the stuff that crazy things. And so we had talked a couple of weeks before. He went there like every other Saturday, and Dusty and Dick, they were like, we're sick of this Bahama deal, man. We got to do something. So they decided amongst the two of them that they were going to kill the Bahamas. They were going to do something that night that was going to destroy wrestling down there, so they never had to go back again. Right?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So and this is one of the rare occasions that I'm in the ring with him, and I'm in the ring with a partner named Bill Miller,
Hmm.
who's a big time wrestler, and he had a brother that was even a bigger star. But it's Bill Miller and I, and then we got a referee who's really, really a cool guy and a tremendous referee named Schwartz.
Hmm.
And so we're wrestling in the match, and Miller they beat Miller up a little bit, and he gives me a tag, and it's about the time that we've been in there 20 minutes or whatever, and it's about the time to go home, and so when I came into the ring to make a comeback, Murdoch was in the ring. Dusty was kind of out there on the apron like he was going to come in, but then when I came in the ring, I kind of charged over there at Murdoch, and he backed off in the corner, and I was kind of green still at that point, and And he came out of the corner about 3 feet out of the corner, and there was a big old huge ring in Nassau, and he took his leg and he threw it over an imaginary motorcycle. It's like he was going to ride a motorcycle in the ring, right?
Okay.
Now imagine this. Now, and the fans, and I'm standing in the middle of the ring, and then when that happens, Stu Schwartz is standing beside me, and he sees him do this deal where he throws his leg over something, and then he reaches out like he's got handlebars, and he starts going, run, run, run. And then he starts running round the circles, around me.
Oh, my God.
In the outside of the ring. And Stu looks at me, and I look at Stu, and Stu goes, "What are they doing?" Right? And I go, "I don't know. What do I do?" And he goes, "I don't know. I don't know what you should do." Right? So meanwhile, there goes Murdoch. He's just circling round and round and round me, man. And this ring had to be 30 feet in all four directions. It's 10 feet bigger than any ring he'd ever been in.
Yeah.
So he had plenty of room to ride his motorcycle. And he rode the motorcycle around probably 4 or 5 times. And then when he got over close to the corner where Dusty was, he went, hup, 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 and then he took a bump on his back. Nobody around him. He just went straight back on his back. And now my mouth falls open like, what in the hell is this? And Dusty says to me, he screams at me, he goes, "Hey, ignorant, he's out of gas. Cover him."
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
So, and Stu Schwartz looks at me, and I look at him again like, what is he serious? Dusty says, "Cover him, he's out of gas." So I go over and cover him, and Stu counts him out. 1, 2, 3, and they get up. Murdoch gets up, and they walk right straight back to the dressing room.
Oh.
And that's the end of the match.
Done.
Well, it's actually the end of the town.
Wow. Okay.
The fans are all sitting there. They don't know where they're going. They were just like us. What's going on? What's happening up there, right? So that's just one of my stories about Dusty. Which gosh, I love Dusty, man. He was a character. So as I began to be a better wrestler, I began to have a few more matches with Dusty. Dick Murdoch left that territory in about 1972, late 72, maybe early 73. And Dusty was still a heel there. And all through 1973 and 1974, actually, Dusty isn't going to leave there until the 80s. Mm-hmm. He's going to be there a long time. So I had become, in 1973, the Southern Heavyweight Champion. And I had a match with him, and I put the actual belt on him. He beat me in September 18th, 1973 for the Southern Heavyweight Championship. And he's a big heel at this point, 73. And then I wrestled him again about 3 weeks later in my hometown. I lived in West Palm Beach. Every other wrestler in the state lived in Tampa. But I lived in West Palm because I was helping run that town. Mm-hmm. So, I had another opportunity to work with Dusty one-on-one in 1973. Mm-hmm. By 1974, business in Florida was very, very strong. Dusty had become one of the heels in Gary Hart. Gary Hart's tremendous manager, man. Great manager. He had been in the territory since 73 on into 74. And he had created what he called his army. He had a bunch of great heels, and Dusty was one of those heels. And during that time, I wrestled with some big-time partners against Dusty. I mean, guys that were really, really talented baby faces, man. And Dusty would team up with some of the other heels in that army. So I wrestled with Bill Watts against Dusty Rhodes and Buddy Colt in 74. Mm-hmm. Me and Watts wrestled against Dusty Rhodes and Korean Pak Song, big, huge son of a gun. Mm-hmm. One of the ugliest and most dangerous looking people you ever could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Eddie Graham had a tag match with Dusty and Buddy Cope. And I worked partners with Don Morocco, who was a great star back in those days,
Yeah.
against Dusty and Chris Markoff. Just a few examples of tag matches I was lucky enough to get to have with Dusty. And on May 14th, 1974, just a few days before Dusty was going to turn babyface for the first time in his career, he'd
Mm-hmm.
never been a babyface. And about 3 days basically before he turned babyface, and when he did, it exploded business in Florida to levels never seen before or since.
Wow.
Man, it just exploded business when he turned a babyface. And I got to wrestle him in a single match, just me and him,
Mm-hmm.
1974. So a few days later, he turned babyface, and it happened in Tampa, Florida. He was in a match with Pac Song as his partner, Buddy Hart's the manager, and on the other side there was Mike Graham, and I can't remember who Mike's partner was, but anyway, they got rid of Mike's partner, and then Pac Song and Gary Hart got Gary was really a very involved manager. He liked to be in the ring if he could get there, and if he could get the referee out of the way, he would do some horrible things. He had more heat than some of the wrestlers, and he and Pac Song were just beating the heck out of a young Mike Graham, who was, wow, he's a hometown boy, and Eddie Graham's his dad, and they had him bleeding. And it was a nasty deal, man, where they were just going to look like they were going to kill him. And Dusty was Pac Song's partner, and instead of helping Pac Song and Gary Hart, he attacked them. He took care of the business for Mike Graham, saved Mike's butt, basically.
Yeah.
And that's where he turned babyface. Now you had that big, huge heel crew of heels, man, Gary Hart's group, and now Dusty's got all these guys to go fight with, and it was phenomenal business. It's hard to explain how good business was for months. I can remember for months after Dusty turned babyface, from the day he turned babyface, every town we went to in the state, wherever it was, no matter how big the building, they were all sold out. And lots of times when you got to the buildings, there was probably more people outside than they could put inside. It just ignited wrestling. It was spectacular. I mean, I'd never experienced it before or since. It was the biggest run I ever saw over a 4 or 5 month period of time. It had stayed that way for years, but the first 4 or 5 months of it was tremendous. So, and I left Florida for good, just a few months after that, and I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and Southeastern Wrestling was born. So I only saw Dusty a few times after that run, after I left Florida. A couple of those times I worked with him on shows in the Omni in Atlanta, big shows that they would bring in guys from all over the country, and Dusty'd be on there and I would be, and it was always great to see him. And a couple of times he even worked for me in Southeastern Pensacola down there. Worked in, I think he worked one time in Dothan, Alabama, in the town that you're very close to.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
So, so let's talk about his NWA world title runs. So he was the second in a small number of wrestlers that they allowed to win the belt for a very short period of time and then quickly lose it back. And we did one already, you and I, on Giant Baba.
Yeah.
One of these stud stories on Giant Baba. And Giant Baba was one of those guys that he had that happen for him twice in Japan. And Dusty had more than one run in this manner too. So actually it was four times. So he won the first NWA 10 pounds of gold belt, man, from Harley Race in Tampa, Florida, on August the 21st, 1979. And he lost it back to Harley 5 days later in Orlando. So, what was happening is Harley was coming into these territories and staying for a week. And because they had such influence in Florida during that time frame, and Dusty was so over, that they decided that let's put the belt on Dusty, but we'll take it off. So basically, when Flair would go in the first night, uh, he'd get beat by Dusty, and the last night he was there, he'd beat Dusty for the world title, and he'd get the belt back.
Yep.
So it helped the territories, the ones that they did this in, significantly because they never got to see. Most territories never saw a world title change hands. You
Right.
get the champion coming year after year, and he never loses. That finally loses a little bit of its appeal.
Right.
But that just hyped things up for him. In 1979, it helped him obviously to get things cranked back up again if they were down a little bit. Now his second win came. He had the belt for almost 3 months. He beat Harley again. This time it was in Atlanta, June 21st, 1981. And then he lost the belt, but not back to Harley. It was on September 17th, 1981. Almost 3 months later, he lost the belt, but he lost it to Ric Flair in Atlanta. So he had won it in Atlanta, and he lost it to Flair in Atlanta
Mm-hmm.
3 months later. So his third win was really under a very unusual circumstance. And Dusty had all these ideas. He had all these names. He had all these things little sayings. And so he had a situation in which he got suspended from the Florida territory. I got to guess, they probably did a loser leave town match, and Dusty lost. And then Dusty didn't want to leave, but Dusty comes back as a masked man called the Midnight Rider. So on February 9th, 1982, the Midnight Rider beat Ric Flair in Miami, Florida. Now, and obviously Dusty's the masked man. And, but and I don't know if the Florida office just pulled this one without talking to the people in the NWA, and at that point, Bob Geigel was the president of the NWA.
Mm-hmm.
So the Midnight Rider, supposedly that night, was asked by the NWA president Bob Geigel. He either told him you have to unmask or you got to return the belt, because the National Wrestling Alliance had a rule that forbid any masked wrestler from ever holding the NWA title.
Wow. I never heard of that.
Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah.
So the Midnight Rider, he decided he'd give up the belt, and that way he could stay wrestling in Florida. He didn't have to leave. He was already suspended as Dusty Rhodes, but the Midnight Rider could stay.
Right. Okay.
So Dusty Rhodes was champion for 24 hours, basically. And then they took the belt back the very next day. So the fourth and the last time Dusty was ever the NWA World Champion, he held it for about 2 weeks. It happened, his winning of it happened on July 26th. In 1986, in Greensboro, North Carolina. He won it from Ric Flair, and he lost it back to Flair on August the 9th, 1986, which is about 2 weeks later, basically.
Yeah.
So they were doing some awfully strange things with the title back in those days. I think it was probably a bad deal for them to have done it as many times as they did. But you got a guy with the talent that Dusty had, and he had a lot of pull, and his run is going to go way on past these 1986 dates. He's going to hook up with Jim Crockett Jr., and they're going to run some of the biggest cities in America. They're going to be big time. One of the last territories that's going to be able to fight with Vince. To stay in there and hang in there with against Vince Jr.
Yeah.
So Dusty really had something to me. He had something about him that was extremely special, and he called it charisma. I got charisma, baby.
Charisma. Okay.
Yeah. He called it charisma, though. It wasn't a charisma. It was a charisma that does.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better word for it, as a matter of fact. But I do know there's never going to be another Dusty Rhodes.
No
I can
way.
tell you that.
No
You
way.
know?
Wow.
And so, thanks everybody out there for joining me for this Stud Stories number 19. And don't miss the next NWA World Champion that I'm going to wrestle. And he's another one of those week time champions, 1 week champions. It's Wildfire Tommy Rich.
Oh yeah.
And he's in a territory that's red hot during this time frame, and he is the hottest, one of the hottest baby faces they ever had there. So that's going to be the next person I talk about when I do another one of these stud stories that's on the NWA World Champions. And thanks to everybody out there for your continued support.